Alright, so we're going to talk about our third type of lipid here. Phospholipids. How do you know it's a lipid? Look at that. Look at that end of that name. How could you not know that's a lipid, right? This is the most lipidy of the bunch. Triglyceride, that's not really fatty acid. Doesn't really sound like a lipid. Phospholipid, oh, that's a lipid. Steroids, oh, you can't even rearrange the letters to spell lipid there. So this is definitely one you should remember as a lipid, right? And so what you have is and I'm gonna kind of cut back on the level of detail here because you guys have seen fatty acids for 2 videos now. But we have what looks like a triglyceride, but there's only 2 fatty acids attached to the glycerol backbone. And then what we have is a phosphate. And then that phosphate bridges to some sort of, polar molecule. Generally something that can H-bond. Doesn't hurt either. So what we have is a non-polar area here. And then across from it, we have a polar area. So often we say there's a polar head and a non-polar tail. So when we look at this in a more common representation, you often see it kind of looks like a little 2-legged creature or something, because you've got like this guy. They generally show us something like that, right? That is your and maybe you have an unsaturated one in there as well, so it's doing a little kick. And so we've got polar, and then down we've kind of got this guy, and then below it we've got the same thing going the opposite direction. I'll do one more unsaturated fatty acid chain in there. And so it's polar on the outside. And so generally what you're dealing with out here is these polar heads are attracted to water. They interact very favorably with the water. And these tails in here create a non-polar region. And they're going to interact favorably with each other. And so this goes all the way around in 3 dimensions, and you get a cell. And so this is what we call the lipid bilayer. So what does that mean? It means 2 layers of lipids, 2 layers of phospholipids, or maybe it's the sometimes it's also called the phospho. It can be said both ways: lipid bilayer, phospholipid bilayer. Either one's fair game. So then the question becomes, well, how do things come in and out of the cell? And oftentimes, this is something I usually throw the projector, but I'm drawing it today. You guys are special. Congratulations. You get to see my high quality art. So my mom is actually an artist, and fun fact, her son is definitely a chemist and not an artist. So, and I don't have any siblings. I'm talking about me. Alright, so what we have here is called, I'm going to turn this sideways to the right for a second, a transport protein. And that allows stuff to, move. Say this is in the cell here. This is outside. And this lipid bilayer is going to continue around it. The lipids got smaller, but that's just a perspective thing. They're just moving away from you. That's all that is. And so things can move out or they can move in. And so they bypass. And so there's 2 types of transport proteins. There's active transport, there's passive transport. Water is passively transported, and that means that water can move freely through a protein channel. So this is like a little hollow straw that only lets water through if it's the water transport protein. And it can move freely. So it just equilibrates pressure, osmosis, all that, osmotic pressure, all those things, which we'll talk about osmotic pressure. Actually, I think it's in the next section. Man, this class is flying by. But water can move freely, but other things, you have to spend energy. You got to burn energy, and you have to pay shipping. So water travels free. It's like, I don't know, it's a baby on a plane. You don't pay for... Everyone around you pays for the baby being on the plane, but financially, you do not pay for the baby to be on the plane. They don't need a seat. Why would you pay for that? Airlines don't make you do that. Everyone around you, though, is like, oh, I know what happens when a baby gets on a plane. They don't like it when the ground is like 10,000 or 30,000 or whatever. I don't know what altitude they fly at anymore. Whatever the altitude is. They don't like being that far from the ground. And who does? But as adults, you just sort of sit there and deal with it and go like, physics works, physics works, physics works. This is fine. There's lift. We're moving. Blah, blah, blah. But a baby's just like, we're going to fall and die. Cry, 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 cry. And then the people around them start going like, well, if this plane crashes, I hope it's soon so I don't have to deal with this anymore. If you haven't flown recently, there you go. There's my rendition of it. Don't get me started on flying around the holidays either. Oh boy. So, you got to pay shipping. So certain things to move in and out, you know, we don't want everything to just move in and out of the cell freely. So they're not at what we call equilibrium. They're going to hoard stuff. So for example, glucose is going to have to be actively transported in or out of the cell. So it can absorb glucose and hold on to it for when it's needed, or it can release it into the bloodstream if other cells are in need of it. So, you know, that's why blood sugar can vary, not just from diet, but also from our ability to respond to insulin to adjust those levels. So insulin is signaling cells what to do with blood sugar. It's not itself doing anything. It's a signaling protein that's telling other cells what to do. So, these phospholipids are used in the lipid bilayer, and this can happen with organelles within the cell as well. So they have the exact same sort of structure that you'd have on the cell membrane as a whole. So anytime you want to section stuff off, you use these. And as I talked about in a previous video, where it's talking a little bit about the lipid bilayer, it's great because it self-assembles. So if I just mix a bunch of phospholipids together, I will get the structure of a cell automatically. Now I'll be missing, you know, the nucleus and the ribosomes and whatever else you want to think of, mitochondria. All those pieces aren't necessarily in there, but I have the shell. So it self-assembles, which is really nice. So the cell doesn't have to spend energy maintaining its structure. Attractive forces do that for it. So that's a really nice feature. What else can we add here? So the polar top here favors water. Non-polar tail favors interacting with non-polar tails of other phospholipids. And then these are going to favorably interact with the water inside the cell down here. And so that's why they self-assemble. Alright, so that's kind of all the detail on these. If this isn't doing it for you, you know, you know what a fatty acid looks like. Just draw two fatty acids. You know what the glycerol backbone looks like now. Feel free to draw that. And you know what phosphate is. Remember phosphate? I'll draw it over here for you. It's P. It's got an OH. It's got another alcohol, double bonded O, and then an O minus hanging out. So that's our phosphate. Feel free to put these together yourself if you want. Get that in camera for you. But essentially this is just going to perform a condensation reaction here, and then some other molecule. You don't even have to do that if you're putting it together, but be aware that often there is a polar molecule that gets attached to the condensation reaction here. So you have condensation reaction, condensation reaction, condensation reaction, condensation reaction. So 4 of these. You make 4 waters putting one of these together typically. There's not always a polar molecule, because phosphate can hydrogen bond, but it does help the stability to have one there. So there's actually a little bit of a mix here. And sometimes there's other stuff attached for cellular signaling. You know, the old friend or foe detail about, you know, is that cell supposed to be there? You know, the T cell shows up and it's like, you know, what did the troops say in World War II? The air parachute guys. They'd go thunder and then they would go lightning. And if they didn't, they thought it was a German and they'd attack each other. And so the T cell comes along, it's like thunder, and your cell's like lightning, and often it uses this to say lightning. So it's one of those things. So there's a lot of complexities here we're not going to get into. You might have learned something about World War II, or maybe you saw Band of Brothers and you already know that. Either way. Cool. So, one more type to talk about next. It's the craziest one of all, because like these have fatty acids, triglycerides have fatty acids. I introduced this section with fatty acids. Steroids are made from fatty acids, but they do not look like a carbon chain with a carboxyl group on the end. You'll see. So they're the wild and crazy ones. So You see long carbon chains, you see carboxyl groups, and then you start seeing like a glycerol backbone. You know you've got a lipid. And then there's the one more, and it's like, oh yeah, and also if you see a steroid, you've got a lipid. But we'll talk about those next.